Listen, can you hear this? If this strange echo reaches you, congratulations, you've breached the zone of alienation. You're tuned in to the Liquidator's last transmission, broadcasting live, or more accurately, dying heroically live, from a very hot, very radioactive roof in the Soviet Union in the year of our Lord 1986. My name is Anatoly, a humble firefighter, and if the sheer impossible audacity of this trans-dimensional broadcast, from a moment when lies are more plentiful than oxygen, doesn't compel you to immediately smash that subscribe button and commit to understanding the forbidden truth, then frankly, your mind is as shielded as our superiors' consciences. Do it now, before the Politburo finds this signal. And tell me, if this peculiar connection holds, from what strange, uncontaminated corner of your world are you listening? What year has fate decreed for you? And what hour do these shocking tidings reach you? We're taking notes for posterity. Now hold your breath, it won't help, and let's dissect the glorious, glowing reality of the end.
April 26th, a perfectly normal night. We lived in the future, you see, in our modern apartments, with our modern kitchens. The plant was our pride. We got a call about a fire. A simple fire, they said. Go and put it out, they said. They lied. They always lied, of course, but usually about the quality of sausage, not about the end of the world. This lie, however, had a certain glow to it, a certain permanence. We got there, and the fire, it wasn't red. It was a beautiful, otherworldly blue, like 1,000 stars burning on the roof. We didn't understand. We just saw a fire. So we climbed. We fought. We bathed in its beautiful, beautiful light. The light, it turns out, was death, a silent, shimmering, atomic death that crept into your bones while you admired its spectral beauty. The air itself felt wrong. It was thick, heavy, like breathing in a mouthful of coins. Every breath was a fresh deposit of metal on the tongue. We were told it was just a fire on the roof of the turbine hall, a standard, by-the-book industrial blaze. But the turbine hall was over there, and this inferno was clawing its way out of the very heart of reactor number 4. The building was torn open, a gaping wound in the concrete sarcophagus, and it was bleeding light. Our lieutenant, a man whose face was a permanent roadmap of bureaucratic anxiety, just kept screaming orders. "Get the hoses to the roof! Douse the graphite fires!" Graphite. We looked at the black, glassy chunks of material scattered around us, some as big as watermelons. It didn't look like any construction debris I'd ever seen. It had a strange, inner heat to it, a thrumming energy you could almost feel in your teeth. We were brave, you see, or maybe just stupid. The two are often confused, especially when a man in a uniform is shouting at you. We saw the ladder leading up the side of the wounded building, disappearing into that strange, hypnotic glow. We saw our duty. We didn't see the 17,000 Röntgens per hour that were waiting for us at the top. At that dose, your life expectancy is measured in minutes, not years. A truly efficient system. The climb was an ascent into another world. The rungs of the ladder were slick with some kind of oily dew, and the heat intensified with every step. It wasn't the dry, baking heat of a normal fire. This was a wet, penetrating heat, a pressure that pushed against your skin and made the air shimmer. My canvas coat, meant to protect me from flames, felt as useful as a paper napkin in a hurricane. My partner, Misha, coughed beside me. "Feels like we're climbing into the sun, eh?" he joked, his voice strained. I laughed, but it came out as a dry croak. The air was getting hard to breathe, not from smoke, but from something else. It was like the oxygen was being cooked out of it, replaced by this electric, zinging energy that made the fillings in your teeth ache. A cosmic microwave oven, and we were the main course. Reaching the top was like stepping onto another planet. The roof was a hellscape, painted in beautiful colors. The air pulsed with that impossible blue and violet light emanating from the chasm where the reactor core used to be. There were no roaring flames, no crackling wood, just a silent, majestic, and utterly terrifying column of light reaching for the heavens. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and it was killing us with every second we stared at it. The sound was wrong too. There was no mighty roar. Instead, a low, deep hum vibrated through the soles of our boots, a bass note that seemed to come from the center of the earth, and a high-pitched hiss, like a million snakes whispering secrets of fission and decay. It was the sound of atoms tearing themselves apart, and we were standing right in the front row of the concert. We unrolled the hoses, our movements clumsy and slow. It felt like moving underwater. The lieutenant was still yelling, his voice a distant, tinny sound in this overwhelming sensory assault. "Aim for the fires on the graphite! Cool it down!" Graphite. We looked at the black, glassy chunks of material scattered around us, some as big as watermelons. It didn't look like any construction debris I'd ever seen. It had a strange, inner heat to it, a thrumming energy you could almost feel in your teeth, a starting to smile unlike anything they'd ever seen. Some of the men grabbed shovels, an even more brilliant idea from our commandos. "If you can't spray it, bury it." They started shoveling the smaller chunks of graphite off the roof. I watched a young recruit, barely 20, heave a piece over the side. As it left his shovel, he grunted and stumbled back, shaking his hand. He said it felt like the shovel had given him a powerful electric shock. We now know he had just thrown a piece of the sun, and it had kicked back. Then came the sickness. It started with a headache, a crushing pressure behind the eyes, then a wave of nausea so intense I had to brace myself against a ventilation shaft to keep from falling. My vision swam, the beautiful blue light fracturing into a kaleidoscope of painful colors. I looked at Vasily, and his face, illuminated by the glow, was the color of a cooked beet, a healthy-looking sunburn that meant your cells were liquefying. He caught my eye and grinned, a strange, tight grimace. "Getting a bit warm up here, eh?" he said, before turning away to vomit over the side of the building. The vomit was a dark, viscous stream that fell into the night. Below us, Pripyat slept on, completely unaware that a handful of fools in canvas coats were being sacrificed on a nuclear altar to uphold a lie. We were told our boots were melting. We looked down, and the thick tar on the roof was indeed bubbling around our feet, sticking to our soles. We were sinking into the apocalypse. We'd laugh about it, a ragged, desperate sound. "My wife will kill me if I ruin another pair of boots," one man shouted. It was either laugh or scream, and we were too well trained to scream. The metallic taste became overwhelming, a thick coating on my entire mouth. I started coughing uncontrollably, a deep, hacking cough that brought up bile. Each spasm sent a jolt of pain through my head. This wasn't smoke inhalation. This was my body screaming, telling me to run, to get away from the beautiful, silent poison I was breathing, touching, and bathing in. But there was nowhere to run. We were on that roof for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably less than an hour. Time had ceased to have meaning. There was only the heat, the light, and the hiss. We saw other brigades arriving, more young men running up the ladders to join us in our heroic, pointless task. Fresh fuel for the fire, fresh bodies to soak up the gamma rays. We were not fighting a fire. We were standing inside a death machine, and its only function was to radiate. The fire was a lie. The whole mission was a lie. We were human sponges, sent to absorb something so lethal that even the concept of it was beyond our comprehension. We thought we were firefighters, but the state had turned us into disposable tools. Don't let our desperate cries for clarity fade. Subscribe for more tales of beautiful horrors. We stared into the heart of a nuclear star, and it stared back. The story of what we saw, what we felt, is written in our very atoms. Clicking that button ensures our testimony echoes beyond the grave. I remember looking at my hand, holding it up in the blue light. I could almost see through it. My skin was translucent, my bones casting faint shadows. I was becoming a ghost in real time. A premonition of the man I would become, a collection of painful memories and radioactive isotopes, the hero who got a medal he would never see, and a disease named after him. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a strange, fatalistic calm. We were going to die. Some of us knew it then, on that roof. We felt it in our marrow. There was a peculiar freedom in that knowledge. The fear was gone, replaced by an empty, hollow acceptance. We were already dead men walking. We just had to wait for our bodies to get the memo. My final coherent thought on that roof, before they carried me down, was of the sheer cosmic absurdity of it all. The most advanced technology of our great Soviet Union, the pinnacle of our scientific achievement, had been defeated by a few men in bad suits pushing the wrong buttons. And we, the firefighters, were the ones sent to clean up the mess with shovels and buckets. It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. They took us away, but a part of us never left that roof. We are forever bound to that place, our shadows burned into the concrete by that single, brilliant flash of blue light. We are the guardians of that invisible fire, the eternal witnesses to the moment when the peaceful atom showed its true, terrifying face. So listen to this broadcast. Listen to the voice of a man who stood on the sun and lived just long enough to tell the tale. This isn't just a story. It's a warning, transmitted from the past to your glowing screen. Don't let this signal fade into noise. Subscribe, share, and ensure that the world never forgets the cost of a beautiful lie. Let our sacrifice be the reason you demand the truth, always.
It started with the taste. Before the sirens, before the lies became obvious, before the beautiful, deadly light, there was the taste, a phantom flavor that crept into your mouth uninvited. It was the first scout of an invading army, planting its flag on your tongue. We joked about it at the station hours before the alarm. "Did the cook use lead pots again?" someone asked. We laughed. We had no idea the air itself was turning against us. It tasted like a battery, a mouthful of copper, a faint electric tang, as if you'd licked a 9-volt battery on a dare. You'd swallow, drink some water, but it would not leave. It was a stubborn guest that had already made itself at home in the back of your throat. It was the taste of the atom, and it was the first sign that our bodies were no longer our own. They were becoming contaminated archives of a colossal failure. When we were on the roof, bathed in that ethereal glow, the taste grew stronger. It became a thick, metallic coating, a flavor so potent it felt like you could chew on it. Every breath was an inhalation of poison, but we didn't know that. We were brave firefighters, and the official state-approved manual had no chapter on what to do when the air itself becomes your enemy. A minor oversight, I'm sure. My comrades, they started to get sick, vomiting. We thought it was smoke or exhaustion. We did not know what it was. We did not know the enemy had already climbed into our blood. It began with Victor, the quiet one. He just leaned over the edge of the roof and was sick. Then another and another. It was like a chain reaction, a domino rally of nausea, a symphony of retching, beautifully backlit by the blue glow of our doom. We tried to rationalize it. The physical exertion was immense, the heat was oppressive, and the smoke, though strange, was still smoke. "It's the chemicals from the roof tar," Misha gasped, wiping his mouth. "They must use some nasty stuff here." We clung to any explanation, no matter how absurd, because the alternative was simply unthinkable. The alternative was that we were standing in an invisible fire that was burning us from the inside out. Then came the fatigue. This was not the normal, satisfying tiredness after a hard day's work. This was a profound, crushing weariness that settled deep in your bones. Your limbs turned to lead. Your eyelids felt like they had weights attached to them. It was as if gravity had decided to focus its full attention exclusively on you. We were young, strong men, yet we found ourselves stumbling like ancient invalids. I remember watching my friend Pavel try to swing his shovel at a chunk of graphite. He lifted it, but the motion was slow, sluggish. He looked like a man moving through deep water. He grunted, his face pale and slick with sweat, and let the shovel fall. "I just need a moment," he mumbled, slumping against a ventilation stack. That moment, for him and for all of us, would stretch into a very brief, very painful eternity. A strange headache began to bloom behind my eyes, a dull, throbbing pressure. It wasn't like a normal headache that you could soothe with aspirin and a quiet room. This was an internal drumming, a rhythm that matched the low hum coming from the reactor's corpse. It felt like my skull was too small for my brain, which was suddenly very interested in expanding. And the coughing. It started as a tickle, an irritation you blame on smoke, but it grew into a harsh, hacking bark that tore at your throat. It was a dry, unproductive cough that offered no relief. It was your lungs desperately trying to expel microscopic intruders that had already begun rewriting your cellular structure. Our bodies knew we were in mortal danger long before our brains were allowed to accept the fact. We started to look at each other, really look. In the eerie blue light, our faces were flushed, a deep, unnatural red like a severe sunburn. "We're getting a tan, boys," someone joked, and we all laughed. A weak, ragged sound. We were getting sunburned in the middle of the night by a fire that gave off no smoke. The absurdity was so complete, so profound, that laughter was the only sane response left to us. This radiation tan was the mark of the beast. It was your skin, your largest organ, screaming in protest as billions of gamma rays and neutron particles pierced it like microscopic bullets. It was the first visible sign that our bodies had become battlegrounds, and we were losing the war on a cellular level. We were literally cooking in our own uniforms. We were told to keep fighting, to keep pouring water on a fire that drank it like it was nothing, to keep shoveling debris that kicked back with invisible force. Our commanders, safe in their bunkers, were playing chess with human pieces. Sacrifice a few firemen, they must have thought, and we can keep this quiet. The problem is, the truth, much like radiation, has a way of leaking out. My stomach churned and a wave of dizziness washed over me. The world tilted on its axis. The beautiful, terrible light seemed to pulse and warp. I fell to my knees, my canvas coat crinkling. The tar on the roof was soft and bubbling, clinging to my clothes. I felt like I was sinking into hell itself. And in a way, I was. A very specific, Soviet-designed hell. I joined the chorus of vomiting men, adding my contribution to the mess on the roof. It offered no relief. The nausea was still there, a knot of sickness in my gut that would not untie. The invisible enemy was not just in the air, it was inside my stomach, my blood, my bones. It was a parasite that had found a new home. If you're still processing that insidious sickness, then you absolutely must subscribe. You need to understand how quietly the end can begin. It starts with a strange taste in your mouth, and before you know it, your own body has become a traitor. Click the button to bear witness. The camaraderie began to fray at the edges. The jokes stopped. We moved with a grim, robotic purpose, the unspoken knowledge hanging in the air between us. We were all feeling it now, the headache, the nausea, the impossible fatigue. We were all marked men. We were a brigade of ghosts. We just hadn't been issued our death certificates yet. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, not from fear, not from cold. It was a fine, uncontrollable tremor, as if my nerves were firing at random. My own body was a stranger to me, a malfunctioning machine. The warranty, it seemed, had just expired in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. They gave us milk to drink afterwards. Milk, as if a glass of calcium could wage war against plutonium isotopes. "This will help with the toxins," a medic told me, his eyes refusing to meet mine. It was a gesture so pathetic, so tragically inadequate, that it would have been funny if it wasn't our lives they were trivializing. We did not know the enemy was a force of nature we had unleashed and then foolishly tried to tame.
We were like cavemen trying to fight a thunderstorm with sticks. Our gear was useless, our training was irrelevant, our courage was meaningless. We were simply in the wrong place in the worst time in human history. They call what we experienced acute radiation syndrome. A clean, clinical, boring name for a process so violent and horrifying it defies description. It's the orderly, systematic disassembly of a human being from the inside out. Your cells forget how to divide, your immune system collapses, and your body simply dissolves. It is not a pleasant way to go. The initial phase, the one we endured on that roof, is the prodromal stage, the opening act, the trailer for the feature-length horror film that your life has become. The metallic taste, the nausea, the fatigue, it's just the monster knocking on the door before it tears the whole house down. We were heroes, that's what they told us. They pinned medals on us later in the sterile white beds of Hospital No. 6 in Moscow. But heroism implies a choice. We didn't choose to fight an open reactor core. We were sent. We were lied to. We were sacrificed. We weren't heroes. We were fuel. So, listen to this voice. This is the sound of a man who tasted the atom and choked on it. This broadcast is my final act of defiance. My body might have failed, but my story will not. The metallic taste is long gone, but the bitter taste of the truth remains.
After they pulled us off the roof, they laid us on the floor of the administrative building, a row of dirty, exhausted men reeking of tar and something metallic and sweet. We were the heroes of the hour, yet we were treated like contaminated equipment. We were evidence of a problem that, according to the state, did not exist. The first lie was not spoken. It was in the way they looked at us, or rather, the way they tried not to. The men in suits, they came. They walked in with their polished shoes, careful not to step in the puddles of vomit. They carried clipboards and wore expressions of profound annoyance, as if we had personally arranged this disaster to inconvenience their weekend. They didn't see dying men. They saw a political problem that needed to be managed, minimized, and buried, preferably along with us. They said the radiation was within normal limits. One of them, a party official with a face like a bag of wet cement, held up a dosimeter that was stubbornly silent. It was, of course, a low-range device designed to measure background radiation. Bringing that thing to the reactor was like trying to measure a tsunami with a teaspoon. It was a prop in a play, and we were the unwilling audience. "Everything is fine," he announced, his voice booming with the confidence he absolutely did not feel. Fine. My skin felt like it was on fire, a deep, relentless burn that had nothing to do with heat. My head was splitting open. My stomach was staging a violent revolt. But the man in the suit, the man with the clean fingernails and the safe future, said it was fine. So it must be true. They told us to get back to work. Some of us, the ones who could still stand. There are small fires to extinguish, comrades. The situation is under control. They wanted us to send us back into the radioactive furnace. It was a special kind of bravery, the kind you find in men who are willing to sacrifice absolutely anyone except themselves. Their courage was directly proportional to their distance from the danger. We were too sick, too exhausted to argue. We just stared back with hollow eyes. We were firefighters. We were trained to obey orders.
but our bodies were already in open rebellion against the laws of physics, and they were putting up a much better fight than our weary minds. The enemy had breached the gates and was already sacking the city within ourselves. As the hair fell out of my head, they said, "Fine." It started a day or two later, in the showers at the infirmary, clumps of it in my hands. I looked at my reflection in the steamed-up mirror, at the patchy, raw scalp underneath. I looked like a sick dog, and the voice from a man in a suit echoed in my memory, within normal limits. They were very good at lying. We were very bad at dying quietly. The lies were more pervasive than the radiation. They spread faster, infected more people. While we were choking on atomic dust, the official news reports in Moscow spoke of a minor industrial fire, a small incident quickly contained, nothing to worry about, go back to your lives. The entire Soviet state machinery cranked into motion, not to save lives, but to save face. Our own city, Pripyat, was kept in the dark. On the morning of April 26th, the sun came up on a city that had no idea it was already a ghost town. Children went to school, people went to work, women hung laundry outside to dry in the poisoned air. They even held the wedding that day, right there, under a sky shimmering with cesium-137. A perfect, beautiful, radioactive wedding. From the window of the local hospital where they took us first, you could see it all, the forced normality. The denial was so powerful, it was a physical presence. It was a wall thicker than concrete, built to protect the fragile ego of a superpower from the consequences of its own catastrophic incompetence. We, the firefighters, were the first casualties of that wall. They brought in doctors from Moscow, experts. They looked at us with a mixture of clinical curiosity and pity. We were no longer men, we were specimens. "Tell me how you feel," one asked, as he drew a circle on my arm to monitor the progression of my radiation burns. I felt like a failure, I wanted to say. I failed to stop an invisible enemy that my government told me didn't exist. The lie was more pervasive than the radiation. It spread faster, infected more people. While we were choking on atomic dust, the official news reports in Moscow spoke of a minor industrial fire, a small incident quickly contained, nothing to worry about, go back to your lives. The entire Soviet state machinery cranked into motion, not to save lives, but to save face. Our own city, Pripyat, was kept in the dark. On the morning of April 26th, the sun came up on a city that had no idea it was already a ghost town. Children went to school, people went to work, women hung laundry outside to dry in the poisoned air. They even held the wedding that day, right there, under a sky shimmering with cesium-137. A perfect, beautiful, radioactive wedding. From the window of the local hospital where they took us first, you could see it all, the forced normality. The denial was so powerful, it was a physical presence. It was a wall thicker than concrete, built to protect the fragile ego of a superpower from the consequences of its own catastrophic incompetence. We, the firefighters, were the first casualties of that wall. They brought in doctors from Moscow, experts. They looked at us with a mixture of clinical curiosity and pity. We were no longer men, we were specimens. "Tell me how you feel," one asked, as he drew a circle on my arm to monitor the progression of my radiation burns. I felt like a failure, I wanted to say. I failed to stop an invisible enemy that my government told me didn't exist. The lie was more pervasive than the radiation. It spread faster, infected more people.
While we were choking on atomic dust, the official news reports in Moscow spoke of a minor industrial fire, a small incident quickly contained, nothing to worry about. Go back to your lives. The entire Soviet state machinery cranked into motion, not to save lives, but to save face. Our own city, Pripyat, was kept in the dark. On the morning of April 26th, the sun came up on a city that had no idea it was already a ghost town. Children went to school, people went to work, women hung laundry outside to dry in the poisoned air. They even held a wedding that day, right there, under a sky shimmering with cesium-137. A perfect, beautiful, radioactive wedding. From the window of the local hospital where they took us first, you could see as all, the forced normality. The denial was so powerful, it was a physical presence. It was a wall thicker than concrete, built to protect the fragile ego of a superpower from the consequences of its own catastrophic incompetence. We, the firefighters, were the first casualties of that wall. They brought in doctors from Moscow, experts. They looked at us with a mixture of clinical curiosity and pity. We were no longer men, we were specimens. "Tell me how you feel," one asked, as he drew a circle on my arm to monitor the progression of my radiation burns. I felt like a failure, I wanted to say. I failed to stop an invisible enemy that my government told me didn't exist. The lie was more pervasive than the radiation. It spread faster, infected more people. While we were choking on atomic dust, the official news reports in Moscow spoke of a minor industrial fire, a small incident quickly contained, nothing to worry about. Go back to your lives. The entire Soviet state machinery cranked into motion, not to save lives, but to save face. Our own city, Pripyat, was kept in the dark. On the morning of April 26th, the sun came up on a city that had no idea it was already a ghost town. Children went to school, people went to work, women hung laundry outside to dry in the poisoned air. They even held a wedding that day, right there, under a sky shimmering with cesium-137. A perfect, beautiful, radioactive wedding. From the window of the local hospital where they took us first, you could see it all, the forced normality. We were always told our technology was the best. It was a line repeated so often in schools, in newspapers, on the television, that it became a law of nature. Our rockets were the fastest, our harvests were the most bountiful, and our nuclear reactors were the safest. The RBMK-1000 at Chernobyl was the crown jewel, a testament to the might of the Soviet mind. It was a tamed star given to us to power our perfect communist future. We built it to be perfect, unflawed, the best in the world. They said so. But they built in a flaw. A tiny, fatal flaw, buried deep in the design, hidden by state secrecy and ideological pride. We thought we had mastered the atom, that we had chained this immense power to our will. The atom, it turns out, was just waiting for a mistake. It was patient, and on the night of April 26th, it found its moment. I am a firefighter. I am not a physicist. In the hospital, after the fire, when the lies began to fall apart, some of the engineers, the ones who were dying alongside us, they started to talk. They spoke in whispers, their voices hoarse from the burns in their throats. They explained to us, the simple men, how the great, perfect machine was designed to fail. It was my first and last lesson in nuclear engineering. They told me about something called a positive void coefficient, a fancy term. I am a simple man, so one of the engineers, a young fellow from Kharkov, with eyes that had seen the abyss, he explained it to me like this. Imagine you are driving a car. If the engine starts to overheat, you take your foot off the accelerator and the car slows down. That is logical. That is safe. That is a normal car. The RBMK reactor was not a normal car. In our glorious, prize-winning reactor, if the engine started to overheat, if the water that cooled it turned to steam, a void, it was like the car slammed its own foot down on the accelerator. The hotter it got, the faster the reaction went. The more it needed cooling, the more it fought the cooling. It was a machine designed with a built-in death wish, a suicide machine. This feature was not an accident. Oh no, it was a choice. They designed it this way because it was cheaper. It produced more power, and as a delightful bonus, it was very good at creating weapons-grade plutonium. Our peaceful atom had a secret life making bombs. This convenient, cost-cutting design feature is the reason I am broadcasting to you beyond my own lifespan. It was thrifty. It only cost us the world. And if that wasn't enough, if building a reactor that speeds up when it overheats wasn't a bold enough engineering choice, they added another feature, a flourish of such magnificent tragic incompetence that it almost qualifies as art. They gave the operators an emergency shutdown button, a big red AZ5, the final defense, the "Oh dear God, stop everything" button. When the operators in the control room finally realized they were riding a nuclear tiger, they did the only thing they could. They pressed AZ5. They slammed the emergency brakes on, and for a few crucial seconds, the reactor's power output did not go down. It skyrocketed. The emergency brake was in fact a second accelerator, a final defiant surge of power before the end. Why? Why would a shutdown button increase power? The answer is so simple, so stupid it hurts. The control rods, the things that are meant to slow the reaction, were made of boron carbide. Good. But to save a little money, the tips of these rods, the first part to enter the core, were made of graphite. And graphite, you see, does not slow a nuclear reaction. It speeds it up. So when they hit the button, for 5 terrifying seconds, they pushed 200 graphite tips into the heart of an already unstable reactor. They gave the dying beast a final shot of adrenaline. It was the graphite tips that sealed our fate. It was the shutdown button that caused the explosion. It was the failsafe that made it fail. Poetic, isn't it? Help us understand these perplexing new engineering features. Subscribe now. You won't find this level of creative problem-solving in any Western engineering textbook. This is a special kind of genius, and we have many more stories about it. This fatal secret, the graphite tips, was known only to the reactor's designers in Moscow. It was not in the operating manuals. The men running the plant, the men who we later blamed for the disaster, had no idea that the emergency stop button was a detonator. They were flying a plane without knowing that pulling up on the controls would, under certain conditions, send them into a nosedive. The arrogance is what gets me, the sheer, unadulterated hubris. They knew of the flaws. There had been a similar, smaller incident at the Leningrad plant years earlier. A report was written. It was classified, stamped top secret, and buried in a vault. The great Soviet state could not admit its prize-winning technology was a death trap. Admitting a flaw in the machine was like admitting a flaw in the system itself. And that was heresy. So instead of fixing the flaw, they hid it. They let thousands of people, my family, my friends, all of us in Pripyat sleep next to a time bomb because they were too proud to admit they had made a mistake. Our lives were worth less than their reputation. We were a rounding error in their grand equation of ideological purity. That positive void coefficient the engineer spoke of, that is the eerie blue light I saw punching a hole in the night sky. That is the fire we couldn't extinguish, the fire that didn't burn, but radiated. It was the physical manifestation of a flaw on a blueprint, a ghost in the machine made real. And those graphite tips, that is the explosion that tore through the building. That is the cloud of radioactive poison that drifted across Europe. That is the reason my comrades and I were shoveling chunks of a reactor core off a roof, believing it was simple debris. We were fighting a war against a design choice made by a committee years ago. We were told we were at the pinnacle of human achievement. We believed it. We were proud of our plant. It was our child, our creation. We polished it. We cared for it. We showed it off to visitors. We never knew it was born with a congenital heart defect, a sickness in its very soul, put there by its own fathers. The men who ran the test that night, Dyatlov, Akimov, Toktunov, they were not villains. They were arrogant, yes. They pushed the machine too hard, but they were operating with a blindfold on, playing a game where the rules had been deliberately hidden from them. They were the first victims of the lie before we were. The true disaster at Chernobyl was not the explosion of a reactor. It was the explosion of a myth, the myth of Soviet infallibility. The myth that you can build a system on lies and secrecy and expect it not to collapse in on itself in the most spectacular way imaginable. The fallout from that reactor will poison the earth for thousands of years, but the fallout from the hubris, from the belief that you are too smart to fail, that is eternal. That poison is in the bloodstream of every nation, every government that values its pride over the lives of its people. So do not mourn just for us, the firefighters, the liquidators. Mourn for the very idea that technology alone will save us. Mourn for the arrogance that lives in the hearts of powerful men who believe they can control forces they do not truly understand. The atom was never the real enemy. The enemy was us. This is the sermon from the roof of the world, a final testament from a man who was burned by a perfect machine. They built a monster and told us it was a savior. Do not let them build another. Question everything. Demand the blueprints. Check the math. And for the love of God, before you push the big red button, make sure you know what it really does. Subscribe to this channel. Keep this broadcast going. Let this be the one truth that escapes the secrecy of the vault. Let our story be the flaw they can never hide again.
After us, the first wave, were gone, burned out and shipped off to Moscow to die in lead-lined rooms. The real war began. The fire on the roof was just the first battle. The enemy, the invisible cloud of radiation, had conquered the territory. And to fight it, the Soviet Union turned to its most abundant and most expendable resource, its people. First, they tried machines. It was the logical, modern thing to do. They brought in a fancy police robot from West Germany, a marvel of technology. It took one look at the radiation on the roof, shuddered, and died. Its electronics were fried instantly. They sent up our own lunar rovers, our lunokheds, heroes of the Soviet space program, designed to explore the moon. They met the same fate. The roof of reactor number 4 was more hostile than the surface of the moon. When technology failed, when the pride of the socialist space age was defeated by a pile of radioactive graphite, the generals and scientists in charge turned to a much older, more reliable technology. They turned to Ivan. Ivan with a shovel. Ivan with a wheelbarrow. Ivan who does not have circuits that can be fried and who can be motivated by patriotism or an order from a commanding officer. The liquidators, the nameless heroes. They gave us shovels and told us to dig, to clean. We were the living shields, our lives cheaper than a robot, and much more disposable, apparently.
A great call went out across the empire. Reservists were called up, pulled from their factory jobs and their families. Young soldiers, barely out of basic training, were diverted from their posts. Miners, engineers, drivers, cooks, hundreds of thousands of men. They were told they were going to a special training exercise or to help with the harvest. The lies were more creative this time. They were conscripted into a war they didn't understand, against an enemy they couldn't see, for a cause that was already lost. They arrived by the trainload, a human tide sent to wash away a nuclear catastrophe. I saw them from my hospital bed in the brief moments I was lucid. I'd watched the news reports, the sanitized footage of smiling young men in flimsy lead aprons, bravely liquidating the consequences of the accident. They looked like children playing dress-up, sent to fight a dragon with paper swords. Their only real protection was their own ignorance. The most famous of them, the most tragically heroic, were the ones they sent to the roof, the place that had killed us, the first responders. The radiation there was so intense that any machine was useless. So they created the biorobots. It's a wonderful, clean, Soviet-era word, isn't it? It sounds so advanced. It sounds so much better than what it actually was. A young man in a hastily made lead suit given a shovel. Their job was to run out onto the roof for a single frantic burst of activity. They had 90 seconds, sometimes only 60. They would run out, heave 1 or 2 shovelfuls of radioactive graphite off the edge, and then run back. 90 seconds to absorb a lifetime's worth of radiation, to do a job a machine could not. Then the next man would go. A human conveyor belt of sacrifice. For this, they were promised a new car, a bonus of a few hundred rubles, and an early discharge from the military. A fair trade, the state decided. Your long-term health and your future children's genetics for a larder and a handshake. The line of volunteers was long. We are a nation of poets and fatalists, you see, and sometimes the two are indistinguishable. If you're finding this horrifyingly efficient, smash that subscribe button now. This is the kind of can-do attitude that built an empire. We will be deconstructing more of these brilliant 5-year plans for personal destruction in the future. Then there were the miners, men from Tula, famous for their toughness and skill. The scientists were afraid the molten core, the elephant's foot, would melt through the concrete floor and contaminate the groundwater, poisoning the entire region for centuries, a very real, very terrifying possibility. Their solution was to dig a tunnel under the reactor itself and install a massive liquid nitrogen heat exchanger. So they brought the miners. These men worked around the clock in temperatures reaching 50 degrees Celsius. They stripped off their clothes and their respirators, working practically naked in the radioactive earth because the heat was unbearable. They dug a 150-meter tunnel by hand in a little over a month, a heroic subterranean feat of human endurance. And the punchline to this grand, heroic joke? The heat exchanger they nearly killed themselves to install was never used. The core began to cool on its own. The entire frantic, life-shortening effort was for nothing. They dug their own graves to build a monument to futility. I hope the irony kept them warm at night. It certainly wouldn't be their health. An entire army was deployed in the zone. They felled the Red Forest, a vast woodland of pine trees that had absorbed so much radiation they glowed with a morbid red light. They scraped the topsoil from the earth. They shot all the stray dogs and cats, the abandoned pets of Pripyat, to prevent the spread of contamination. They were waging war on the very landscape. They drove the fire trucks, the helicopters, the armored personnel carriers. They were the cooks in the mess halls, the doctors in the clinics, the drivers ferrying people in and out of the most dangerous place on planet Earth. Every single one of them was a liquidator, a sponge soaking up rems and becquerels so the politicians in Moscow could sleep at night. The state kept a meticulous record of their radiation exposure. Each man had a card. When his card was full, when he had absorbed the maximum permissible dose, a number that was revised upwards multiple times, he was sent home. He was given a certificate, a small medal, and a handshake. "Thank you for your service, comrade. Now please go home and die quietly." Over 500,000 men passed through the zone. 500,000 lives irrevocably altered. They went home to their wives and families, carrying a secret passenger inside their bones. The cancers, the heart conditions, the birth defects in their children, those were the real medals they earned. They were the delayed bill for the state's incompetence. They were told they were saving the world, and perhaps they were. Their sacrifice, the sheer weight of their numbers, did contain the disaster. They built the first sarcophagus, entombed the reactor, and cleaned the land. They paid for the mistakes of the physicists and the politicians with their own bodies. But when it was over, they were forgotten. Their health problems were dismissed as alcoholism or poor diet. Their heroism became an inconvenient, expensive truth. The state that had called them heroes now treated them as a nuisance, a constant reminder of a failure they wanted to erase from history. The liquidators, the nameless army. I was a firefighter, I had a title, but these men, they were just numbers on a page, a statistic in a report. They were the human shield that absorbed the blast so the rest of the world could go on living. Their anonymity was their final sacrifice. So do not just remember the explosion. Do not just remember the glowing light. Remember the man with the shovel. Remember the miner in the tunnel. Remember the young soldier who was told to shoot a pet dog because it was radioactive. Remember the hundreds of thousands who walked into hell because they were ordered to. This is my final broadcast, a signal from the heart of the zone. They tried to make these men faceless, to turn them into a collective noun. Don't let them. Subscribe to this channel. Share this story. Make it so that every time someone speaks of Chernobyl, they don't just see a ruined building. They see the faces of the 500,000 souls who were sacrificed to clean it up. Let their names be remembered, even if we never knew them. Be their memory.
They flew us to Moscow, to a special hospital, Hospital Number 6. It sounded so official, so reassuring. It was a clean, white, sterile place where they brought the state's most radioactive sons to fall apart in private. We were no longer firefighters. We were highly classified medical specimens, living exhibits in a museum of atomic horror. The first few days were a blur of needles, tests, and doctors who spoke in hushed, serious tones. They treated us with a strange mixture of pity and scientific curiosity. We were men who had stared into the sun, and they wanted to document how our wings melted, feather by feather. But then a strange thing happened. A miracle, we thought. First, you get better. The nausea fades. The headache recedes to a dull throb. You can hold down some food. The color returns to your face, or what's left of it under the radiation tan. You feel strong again. You sit up in bed. You joke with the nurses. You tell your comrades, "See, we are tough Soviet men. A little fire can't kill us." You think, "I beat it." A cruel lie. A final cruel joke by the poison. This period of wellness, this fleeting moment of strength, is what the doctors call the latency stage, the walking ghost phase.
It's the cesium and strontium inside you taking a short break, politely waiting for your bone marrow to completely and utterly die before it begins the main performance. It is the deep, silent breath before the scream. Then the skin starts to blister. Your insides turn to water. You realize you have simply entered a different phase of dying. The curtain comes up on the final act, and the scenery is your own body, systematically deconstructing itself. You haven't beaten anything. You have just been given a few days of hope to make the despair that follows that much sharper. A truly thoughtful gesture from the universe. My skin, which had been a healthy-looking beet red, began its transformation. It became a canvas for an artist of the macabre. Deep bruises, the color of a stormy sky, appeared without any injury. Then came the blisters, filled with a clear watery fluid. Then they would pop, and the skin would just slough off, peeling away in wet sheets, revealing the raw, weeping flesh beneath. My friend Vasily, in the bed next to me, joked that he was molting. He whispered, "I will emerge from this a beautiful butterfly." We laughed until we coughed, and the coughing tore at our insides. Humor was the only anesthetic we had left, and we used it liberally, even as our bodies were being repossessed by the atom, piece by painful piece. Then my hair decided to abandon ship completely. Not just on my head, everywhere. Eyebrows, eyelashes, the hair on my arms. It all just fell away. I would wake up in the morning and my pillow would be black with it. One nurse, a kind old woman, tried to be cheerful. She said, "Think of the money you'll save on haircuts." I smiled. It was a good joke. I had no lips to smile with, but I made the effort. Eating became a forgotten luxury. My mouth and throat were a solid mass of ulcers and sores. Swallowing felt like gargling with broken glass. They tried to feed me broth, but even that was an agony. Your body craves fuel, but the very act of fueling it is a fresh new hell. My digestive system had gone on a general strike, and it was not open to negotiations. My insides turned to liquid. The radiation had shredded the lining of my intestines. Everything passed through me. There is no dignity in this kind of death. The nurses would come and clean you, their faces impassive, but you could see the pity in their eyes. You, a strong man, a firefighter, a hero of the Soviet Union, reduced to a leaking, helpless thing in a bed. The doctors tried everything: bone marrow transplants, blood transfusions. They brought in an American doctor, a specialist. He looked at us, and you could see the shock on his face. He had seen the theoretical data, but we were the living, dying proof. Our bodies were rejecting the treatments. Our immune systems had ceased to exist. We were open gates, with no soldiers left to defend us. Don't let our desperate cries for a swift end fade. Hit that subscribe button. Every click is a witness to the fact that some things are worse than a quick death. We begged for morphine, for anything to silence the symphony of pain being conducted in our nerve endings. There is a strange, horrifying beauty to it all if you can detach yourself from the pain. The patterns of the radiation burns on the skin look like maps of unknown continents. The way a man's eyes, without lashes or brows, seem so large and profound. You watch your friends, your brothers transform into something not quite human, and you see a terrible art in it. We were becoming monuments to our own destruction. We would talk to each other in the quiet hours of the night. We wouldn't talk about dying. We'd talk about our wives, our children. We'd talk about fishing trips, about the taste of cold beer on a hot day, about the first girl we ever kissed. We held on to these small, perfect memories like life rafts, even as the ocean of our own biology was drowning us. The nurses were saints. They read us letters from our families. They held our hands when we wept. They saw past the monstrous appearance, the sloughing skin and the bloody bandages. They saw the men we used to be. They knew we were all going to die, but they fought for every second of our comfort, for every small sliver of our dignity. They were the true liquidators, cleaning up the mess in our souls. One by one, the beds around me would become empty. A man would be there in the morning and gone by nightfall. The nurses would come in, change the sheets, and a few hours later a new man, fresh from the zone, would take his place. The process was horrifyingly efficient, a factory assembly line, but in reverse. They brought my wife, Ludmilla, to see me. They told her she could not touch me, that I was a danger to her. I was a living reactor core encased in a hospital bed. She stood at the door, her face a mask of grief. I tried to tell her I loved her, but my voice was a broken rasp. I saw my own death reflected in her eyes, and it was the most painful thing of all. The final stage is a quiet one. Your organs, one after another, simply give up. Liver, kidneys, heart. They stop their work like factory workers at the end of a long, thankless shift. The pain recedes, replaced by a deep, cold numbness. You are floating. You are detached. The frantic, screaming part of you is gone, and only a tired, curious observer remains. You start to see things. The blue light from the reactor, the faces of your friends. You hear the alarm bell from the fire station. Your life doesn't flash before your eyes, it leaks. A slow, steady drip of memories until the bucket is empty. You are not a man anymore. You are a story about to end. They say I died of a heart attack, a clean, simple explanation for the official records. It sounds so much better than complete systemic disintegration due to catastrophic radiation exposure. The state is always so thoughtful in its choice of words. So this is the end of my broadcast. This is the final report from the man on the roof. I am a ghost now, a whisper on the wind that blows through the empty streets of Pripyat. I have told you my story. I have shown you the fire, the lies, and the slow, agonizing beauty of my decay.
While we were being catalogued and prepared for our slow medical disintegration in Moscow, our city, our Pripyat, was living its last stolen day. For 36 hours after the explosion, the government performed a grand piece of theater called Everything is Normal. The sun came up on Saturday, April 26th, and the invisible poison rained down on oblivious citizens. They washed the streets with water, telling people it was to keep the dust down. The dust, of course, was pure fission products. But details like that tend to cause panic, so they just washed it into the gutters. Problem solved.
A wedding party celebrated at a local cafe, toasting to a long and happy future while breathing in iodine 131. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Children played in the sandboxes, making castles from radioactive sand. They splashed in puddles filled with runoff from the plant. I imagine my own son out there, playing, breathing it all in. The men in charge knew. They had the readings. But the order from Moscow was clear: prevent panic at all costs. The illusion of calm was more important than the reality of our children's health. A sound policy for a government of ghosts. Finally, after a day and a half of wringing their hands and debating the political optics, the committee of wise men decided that perhaps, just perhaps, living next to an open, melting-down reactor core was not conducive to long-term public health. The order was given: evacuate. But they couldn't just tell the truth. That would be admitting failure. So they crafted one final beautiful lie. The announcement came over the local radio, a calm, dispassionate voice cutting through the Sunday afternoon quiet. For your attention, in view of the unsatisfactory radiation situation, the city will be temporarily evacuated. Temporary, a word so full of hope, so full of deceit. They told them to pack for 3 days, just 3 days. Essentials only. Documents, some food. Don't worry about the rest. You'll be back on Wednesday. And then the buses came. 1,000 of them. A biblical-scale convoy of rattling Icarus buses stretching for kilometers. They descended on our perfect modern city like a plague of locusts, here to carry away the souls of the living. The people had 2 hours. 2 hours to pack up a life they thought was permanent for a trip they thought was temporary. Imagine the chaos, the confusion, trying to decide what essentials means when you are leaving your entire world behind. Do you take the family photo album or an extra set of clothes? Do you grab your child's favorite toy or the documents for the apartment you will never see again? It was a cruel, impossible choice made under the ticking clock of a lie. And the pets. Leave your pets, the announcement said. They will be cared for. Another lie, one of the most heartbreaking. Dogs whining at the doors, cats watching from the windows as their families got on the buses, believing they would be back in 3 days to feed them. The city was filled with the sound of 1,000 buses and the silent cries of 1,000 abandoned animals. Pripyat, our beautiful city. They told us to leave, just for a few days. We never went back. Our homes, our memories, all left behind for the rats and the silent, invisible poison. A city built for the future, now a monument to a past that never should have been. It is the world's most beautiful tombstone. In 2 hours, a city of 50,000 people vanished. The buses pulled away in a long, sad procession. The people looked out the windows at their homes, at the parks, at the gleaming new supermarket. They looked at the Ferris wheel in the amusement park, which was scheduled to open for the first time the following week, on May Day. It would never open. It would become the most famous symbol of their stolen future. What they left behind was a perfect snapshot of interrupted life. A pot of borscht still on the stove, homework open on a child's desk, a math problem half finished, a chessboard with a game in progress. family photographs smiling from the walls of empty apartments. It's as if the entire city was playing a game of statues, and the music never started again. The city they left was not empty for long. First came the liquidators, the soldiers in their intimidating gear, moving through the silent streets, washing the poison from the walls. They were the city's new, temporary masters, fighting a war in the ruins of our lives. They went through our apartments, confiscating anything deemed too hot. They threw our contaminated furniture, our clothes, our memories out of the windows into piles below. And then, after the men left, nature began its campaign. And nature, let me tell you, is a far more patient and relentless liquidator than any Soviet soldier. Wolves began to walk the silent avenues. Wild boar made homes in the basements of apartment blocks. Trees, with a quiet determination, began to push their way through the concrete floors of our homes. The city was being slowly, methodically erased. If you're still listening and not questioning all progress, subscribe to our channel. We were the future once. We had the peaceful atom and perfect, state-planned cities. It's worth thinking about what grand future you are being promised today, and what secrets might be hiding in the blueprints. From my hospital bed, I'd close my eyes and take a tour. I'd walk down Lenin Avenue, past the Palace of Culture. I'd go to the swimming pool, and in my mind I could still hear the echoes of children laughing, see the sunlight glinting off the water in the high windows. Now it's just a peeling, empty basin, a cathedral of decay. I would visit the schools. They are the creepiest places. Desks covered in a thick layer of radioactive dust, open textbooks fluttering in the wind from a broken window, and the gas masks, thousands of small, child-sized gas masks littering the floor of a school cafeteria. The official story is that they were there for standard civil defense drills, but seeing them scattered like that, it looks like a final, panicked lesson that no one passed. The great Ferris wheel stands guard over it all, a skeleton of bright, cheerful yellow, a promise of joy that was never fulfilled. It has become a pilgrimage site for photographers and morbid tourists. They come to take pictures of our ghost, to capture the haunting beauty of our failure. They don't see the lives that were meant to be lived here. They just see a cool post-apocalyptic backdrop. The city is not dead. It is waiting. It is a museum of the year 1986, a perfect time capsule preserved in strontium and cesium. It holds our memories hostage. My son's first bicycle is probably still leaning against the wall in our apartment building's hallway. My wife's favorite dress is still in the closet. They are more permanent than we are. This city was our pride. It was a worker's paradise, built from scratch in the middle of a forest. We had everything: good schools, a cinema, clean streets, a bright future. We were the children of the atom, and this was our kingdom. And in 2 hours, it all was gone. A paradise lost, not because of sin, but because of a flawed reactor design and a government based on lies. The worst part is the silence. A city of 50,000 people should have a sound, a hum, the murmur of traffic, the sound of voices, the barking of dogs. But Pripyat is silent. It is a profound, deafening silence, broken only by the wind and the clicking of Geiger counters. It is the sound of a future that has been cancelled. So when you see the pictures, don't just see the decay. Don't just see the ruins. See
The fire was out. The liquidators were at work. The city of Pripyat was empty. The physical battle was ending, and a new one was beginning. A war of words, a war against the truth. Because in the Soviet Union, a melted-down reactor was a problem, but a leaked fact was a catastrophe. And so began the great cover-up. For 2 full days, the state media was silent. As a plume of radioactive isotopes drifted toward Sweden, Soviet television was showing folk dancing and cartoons. As we, the first responders, were vomiting our insides out, the citizens of Kiev were being told to prepare for their May Day parade. Nothing to see here, comrades. Go back to your lives. The air is clean. The future is bright. The state is in control. The truth did not come from our own government. It came embarrassingly from Sweden. Workers at a nuclear plant over 1,000 kilometers away set off their own radiation alarms. They thought their plant was leaking. After checking everything, they realized the radiation wasn't coming from inside their plant. It was riding the wind, a gift from the east. It was our secret, delivered by atmospheric science. Cornered by foreign evidence, the state could no longer remain completely silent. So they released a statement, 20 seconds long, buried deep in the evening news. It said there had been an accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. One of the reactors was damaged. Measures were being taken. That was it. An event that would kill thousands and poison a continent was described with the same language one might use for a fender bender. They tried to bury the truth, to bury us. We saw it, we tasted it, we died for it, and they still said it was nothing. Our deaths a secret, our sacrifice a lie, a very Soviet lie. A lie so profound it required an entire state apparatus to maintain. It was perhaps the most ambitious project the KGB ever undertook. The men in gray coats descended upon the hospitals. They went there to offer comfort. They were there to enforce the official story. They confiscated notes from the doctors. They classified our medical records. The diagnosis was not acute radiation syndrome. It was vegetative vascular dystonia, a meaningless term. My body was liquefying, and my chart said I had a vague circulatory issue. They threatened the nurses, the doctors, the families. Do not talk about what you have seen here. The state's reputation was in intensive care, and they were willing to sacrifice anyone to keep it alive. We, the dying, were a national security threat. Our suffering was seditious. Our very existence was an inconvenient truth that needed to be managed. And then they needed villains. A story this big needs a bad guy. And it certainly wasn't going to be the state itself, or the flawed design of its prize-winning reactor. So they put the plant directors on trial, Brukhanov, Fomin, and the infamous Dyatlov. They were paraded before the cameras, the designated scapegoats for a systemic failure. Were they blameless? No. They were arrogant men who pushed the limits. But they were also operating a machine with a secret fatal flaw that had been deliberately hidden from them by the state that was now prosecuting them. It was a show trial in the grand Soviet tradition, a magnificent piece of theater designed to prove that the system was perfect. It was only the people who were flawed. While the official channels were broadcasting lies, the truth traveled through whispers.
It moved through the liquidators' camps, through the hospital corridors, through the refugee families scattered across the country. This sarafan radio, the people's grapevine, was more powerful and more accurate than Pravda. People knew. They knew the scale of it because they could taste it in the water and they could see it in the faces of the sick. Support our fight against historical revisionism. Subscribe now. The first draft of history is often written by the victors, or, in this case, by the liars. We are here to provide the footnotes from the footnotes, the truths from the margins. Some brave souls tried to speak out. The scientists, the ones who knew the terrible truth of the RBMK reactor. The most famous was Valery Legasov, a brilliant chemist who became the face of the cleanup. He went to Vienna, to the International Atomic Energy Agency, and he told the world a part of the truth. A heavily redacted, state-approved version of it, but a version that still shocked the world. For his honesty, Legasov was celebrated as a hero abroad. At home, his career was finished. He was ostracized by his peers, his promotions were blocked, and he was hounded by the KGB. 2 years after the disaster, on the anniversary of the explosion, he hanged himself. Before he died, he recorded a series of tapes detailing the full, unvarnished truth of the cover-up and the design flaws. His final act was to get the truth on the record. He was a liquidator too. He was just liquidating lies. The cover-up outlived the country that created it. For years, the health effects on the population were denied. An epidemic of thyroid cancers in children was dismissed as the result of better screening. The liquidators who fell ill were told their problems were due to stress or drinking. The state could not afford to connect the cause with the effect. The cost, in both money and reputation, was too high. So they built a wall of silence around us. Our names were forgotten. Our medical histories were classified. Our children were born with defects that were officially declared statistical anomalies. We became ghosts in our own country, haunting the halls of clinics and government offices, begging for a recognition that would never come. They entombed the reactor in a sarcophagus of concrete and steel, a monumental effort to contain the radiation. But the real effort went into building a sarcophagus around the truth, a structure of lies and intimidation designed to contain the story. But truth, like radiation, has a way of leaking out. It has a very long half-life. This entire broadcast, these final words from a dying firefighter, has been my attempt to drill a hole in that sarcophagus, to let some light in, to let the whispers out. I have told you everything I know. I showed you the fire on the roof, the taste of metal in my mouth, the slow, agonizing decay of my body, the ghost city we left behind, and the lies they told to cover it all. My time is over. The signal is fading. This is the end of the transmission. I am just one voice from one man who died a long time ago. But you are listening. You, right now, in the future. You are the final part of this story. A story is not like radiation. You can carry it without being harmed. You can share it without fear. They buried us in zinc coffins under concrete so our radiation would not poison the earth. They buried our stories under top-secret stamps so our truth would not poison their power. They failed. You are the proof that they failed. So this is my final order to you. Do not let this story end with the silence of this broadcast. Subscribe to this channel. Share this testimony. Become a liquidator yourself. But the enemy you are fighting is not radiation. It is forgetting. It is silence. It is the revision of history. Fight it with everything you have. Ensure that the cost of lies is never, ever forgotten. This is firefighter Vasily Ignitenko from the roof of Reactor 4, signing off. Be my voice. Be my memory.
After the fire, after the sickness, after the evacuation and the cover-up, the state needed one final act to close the show. A grand finale. Because a tragedy of this scale cannot simply end. It must have a moral. It must have a villain. The system, of course, could not be the villain. So they went looking for some men to fill the part. They needed scapegoats, and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had a fresh supply. Thus began the Great Chernobyl Trial, a masterpiece of political theater. It was not about justice. It was about public relations. It was about finding a few faces to pin the blame on, so the much larger faceless system could walk away, whistling with clean hands. It was a performance designed to reassure the world that the problem wasn't a flawed ideology or a faulty reactor design, but simply a few incompetent workers who were now being dealt with. They put some men on trial. Old men, terrified men. Main characters in our little play were the plant director, Viktor Bruhanov, the chief engineer, Nikolai Fomin, and the deputy chief engineer who supervised the test, Anatoly Dyatlov. These were the men who would carry the weight of a nation's failure on their shoulders. They were marched into a makeshift courtroom, already condemned by the state that needed them to be guilty. The location for this farce was chosen with a special kind of poetic absurdity. They held the trial in the town of Chernobyl, just a few kilometers outside the newly formed exclusion zone. The world's most significant nuclear disaster trial was held in a contaminated area in the local House of Culture. The judges and lawyers would convene to debate justice and then go home and wash the radioactive dust from their clothes. They blamed them, as if one man's mistake could make a reactor explode. They charged them with gross negligence and violation of safety regulations. And yes, they were negligent. Dyatlov in particular was a bully, an arrogant man who pushed his operators to cut corners. But their negligence was a single drop of rain in a hurricane of systemic failure. They were men operating a machine that was designed to kill them, a secret that the prosecution conveniently forgot to mention. The trial was a very loud, very public way of saying it wasn't our fault. But we knew. We always knew. From our hospital beds, those of us who were still alive to watch the news, we knew. We knew about the graphite tips. We knew about the positive void coefficient. We knew that the operators had pressed the emergency shutdown button, the one button that should have saved them, and it was that button which detonated the reactor. The biggest criminal, the most guilty party was not allowed in the courtroom. The flawed RBMK reactor design was not on trial. The scientific and political establishment that had covered up its flaws for years was not on trial. The truth was classified. The evidence was inadmissible. It's very easy to win a case when you have forbidden the defense from mentioning the one fact that proves their innocence. It was a tragic sight. Fomin, the chief engineer, had a complete mental breakdown before the trial even began. He tried to kill himself. They had to delay the proceedings. Dyatlov, meanwhile, was defiant.
He sat in the defendant's box, absorbing the blame, all while absorbing a fatal dose of radiation that was slowly killing him from the inside. He would die years later from his injuries. The state sentenced him to 10 years in a labor camp, but the atom had already sentenced him to death. The men who sat in judgment were themselves part of the system. The judge, the prosecutor, they were all apparatchiks, men who understood that their job was not to find the truth, but to deliver the required verdict, a verdict that would satisfy the public's need for blame and the party's need for absolution. It was a rigged game from the start. If you're enjoying this political farce, please subscribe for more. We have a whole back catalogue of stories where common sense is overruled by bureaucratic convenience. It's a genre the Soviet Union truly perfected. Imagine being one of those men. You dedicated your life to the Soviet nuclear program, the pride of the nation. You worked in the city of the future. You believed in the system. And when that system's creation explodes due to a secret flaw you were never told about, that same system turns on you and declares you the sole architect of the disaster. It is a betrayal of almost biblical proportions. They were found guilty, of course. The verdict was never in doubt. 10 years in a labor camp. A neat and tidy end to a very messy story. The files could be closed, the scapegoats were caged, the state could issue a press release saying that justice had been served and the individuals responsible for the Chernobyl accident had been punished. But who was truly responsible? Should they have put the designers on trial? The men in Moscow who knew about the graphite tips and the instabilities but kept it a secret to save money and face? Should they have put the Minister of Energy on trial, who oversaw a culture of production quotas over safety? Should they have put the entire Soviet ideology on trial, an ideology that claimed perfection and therefore could never admit to a mistake, even one that cost thousands of lives? That trial wasn't for justice. It was an act of purification. A ritual to cleanse the state of its sins by sacrificing a few of its own priests. The men were led away in disgrace, and the system that created them, the system that designed the faulty reactor and lied about its dangers, continued on, unharmed and unblamed. From my ghostly vantage point, I watched it all. I saw the fear in their eyes. And as much as I hated Dyatlov for his arrogance on that fateful night, I couldn't help but see him as another victim. A high-ranking one, to be sure, but a victim nonetheless. He was a man burned by the same fire that burned me. The only difference is that he was forced to live a little longer and take the blame for starting it. The world was told a simple story. A few bad men made a mistake, and now they are in prison. The real story is much more complicated and much more terrifying. The real story is that a system built on lies, pride, and secrecy will inevitably produce a catastrophe. The names of the men in the defendant's box don't matter. If it hadn't been them, it would have been others, at another plant, on another night. The disaster was pre-written into the code of the state. So do not remember the Chernobyl trial as an act of justice. Remember it as a final act of deception, a magic trick where the magician directs your attention to his right hand holding a few terrified engineers, while his left hand, holding the fatal blueprints and classified reports, is hidden behind his back. The real trial is happening right now, in the court of history, and you are the jury. You have heard the evidence. You have heard about the lies, the flaws, the sacrifice, the ghosts. The verdict is yours to deliver. And it is not about 3 men in a makeshift courtroom. It is about all the systems of power that demand loyalty over truth and secrecy over safety. This story, this final broadcast, has been my testimony. I was a witness. Now you are a witness. The trial of Chernobyl never ends because the fight against institutional lies never ends. So I ask you one last time to do more than listen. Act. Subscribe. Share this story. Become a voice for the voiceless and a keeper of the truth. Ensure that the real criminals are never, ever forgotten.
You have been listening for a long time now. You have followed me from the roof of Reactor 4, through the sterile white corridors of Hospital Number 6, and into the ghostly silent streets of my dead city, Pripyat. You might be wondering who I am, or what I am. A ghost? A memory? Let's be scientific about it. I am a collection of radioactive isotopes, a cloud of decaying particles with a story to tell. And this is my final transmission. Why have I done this? Why broadcast this litany of horrors from beyond the grave? It is because the state gave me a death, but they did not give my death a meaning. They gave me a medal for my service, and then classified the medical records that detailed how that service destroyed me. They called me a hero in public, and treated me as an inconvenient statistic in private. They built a sarcophagus over the reactor, and tried to build one over the truth. I am dying. The doctors do not have a word for what I have. My body is staging a civil war against itself, and every cell is a casualty. But I have a word for what they did, a word for the lies, a word for the hubris. This broadcast, this is my truth, my last monument, not to a glorious state, but to a glorious, tragic mistake. This is my final act of defiance. The state could take my health, my home, my future. They could take my life, but they cannot take this story. This story is mine. It belongs to me and to the men who died alongside me. It is the only thing of value I have left to give. It is my entire estate, and I am leaving it to you. I have walked you through the circles of our own Soviet hell. We started with the fire itself, that beautiful, terrible column of light, a light that promised a quick death but delivered a slow one. We walked through the valley of our own sickness, the metallic taste of the unseen enemy, the betrayal of our own bodies, a biological horror show with a cast of thousands. I showed you the lies, the great monolithic wall of denial built to protect the fragile ego of a superpower. The men in suits who told us we were fine as we were dissolving. The newspapers that stayed silent. The television that showed cartoons while the world was ending. A masterclass in institutional cowardice. I showed you the fatal flaw, the absurd, penny-pinching design of a reactor that had a suicide button built into its very core, a machine that was a monument to our own arrogance, our belief that we could tame the atom without respecting its power. We didn't tame it, we just made it angry. I showed you the liquidators, the 500,000 men sent in as a human shield, our bio-robots, cheaper and more expendable than a real robot. I showed you my city,
Pripyat, a worker's paradise, turned into a ghost town in 2 hours because of a lie. A city frozen in time, a museum to a future that never arrived. I even showed you their pathetic attempt at justice, the show trial, the scapegoats, the desperate tragic farce of blaming a few men for a sin that belonged to an entire system. It was the final cynical act in a long play of absurdity. Each chapter of this story is a lesson written in the blood and bone of my comrades. Keep the grim lessons coming. Like and subscribe. There is no shortage of material. Human folly is a renewable resource, and we were sitting on the largest deposit in the world. So what is the point of all this? Am I asking for your pity? No. Pity is useless. It is a sterile emotion. I am not asking for your anger either. Anger fades. No, I am asking for something much more difficult. I am asking for your memory. I am asking you to be a witness. The men who ran the Soviet Union, the men who built the reactor and then lied about its explosion, they counted on one thing above all else: forgetting. They knew that time dulls all edges, that new crises arise, that the world moves on. They believed they could bury their mistake under a mountain of time and silence. My entire broadcast, this voice from the static, is a protest against that silence. It is my refusal to be forgotten. It is my refusal to let the deaths of my friends, Vasily, Victor, Pavel, all of them, be meaningless. Their lives were not just a rounding error in a failed safety test. They were real. They were important. This broadcast is my sarcophagus, not made of steel and concrete, but of words and memories. It is designed not to contain a poison, but to release a truth. And unlike the sarcophagus they built over the reactor, this one, I hope, will never decay. It will never crack. It will be permanent. And what is the truth I am leaving you with? It is not just that a reactor exploded. It is that systems built on lies will always explode. It does not matter if the system is political or financial or technological. If it requires silence to survive, if it punishes truth-tellers and rewards sycophants, it is an RBMK reactor. It has a fatal flaw, and it is only a matter of time until someone pushes the wrong button. Look around you, in your own time, in your own country. Look for the men in suits who tell you everything is fine. Look for the inconvenient truths that are being classified as rumors. Look for the grand projects that cannot be questioned. Look for the scapegoats who are blamed for systemic failures. The ghost of Chernobyl is everywhere if you know how to look. To my wife, Ludmila, if some echo of this message ever reaches you, I am sorry. I am sorry for the life we lost. I am sorry for the pain I caused you. I love you. That is the one truth that the radiation could not burn away. To my comrades, we went to a simple fire. We did our duty. They gave us a medal and a grave. I hope this story serves as a better monument. I will see you on the other side. Save me a seat. And now to you, the listener. The broadcast is ending. My energy is spent. The story is now yours. It is heavy, I know, but you are strong enough to carry it. The state wanted to erase us, to turn us into faceless statistics. My final request, my final order to you is not to let them win. This channel, this collection of stories is now your watchpost. It is your Geiger counter. It is your duty to keep it clicking. So do it. Subscribe, like, share this testimony with anyone who will listen. Argue about it, discuss it, but do not let it be met with silence. Let this be our final defiant roar against the lies that killed us. Be the memory of the men who have no names. Be the truth that could not be buried. Be our legacy.
After the bodies are buried and the trials are finished, what is left? A story, yes, but also a place. A wound on the face of the earth so deep it will never heal. They drew a circle on the map, 30 kilometers in every direction from the ruined reactor, and they called it a new name, a very Soviet, very honest name for once. The Zone. They call it the Zone of Alienation, a very accurate name. It is alienated from life, alienated from hope, a place where ghosts walk, the ghosts of our mistakes. My ghost soon will be among them. Very dignified, that. A permanent address in the world's most exclusive, most toxic gated community. This is the final legacy of our great atomic project. Not a shining city, not cheap electricity, but a forbidden kingdom ruled by an invisible and eternal king, the decaying atom. 2,600 square kilometers of our homeland rendered uninhabitable for the next 24,000 years. We managed to create a problem that will outlast every country, every ideology, every human being currently alive. A truly impressive achievement in long-term planning. The danger in the zone is a quiet one. It does not roar or scream. It is the silence of the birds on a beautiful spring day. It is the shimmer in the air above the asphalt. It is the sweet metallic taste you might notice as you breathe. The sun shines, the grass grows, but it is all a lie. The landscape itself is a beautiful, elaborate trap, baited with nostalgia and baited with life. I can see it even now. A ghostly tour for one. I can float over the red forest, where the pine trees absorbed so much radiation in the first few days that they turned a morbid shade of ginger and died. The liquidators had to chop them all down and bury them in trenches as if they were a legion of fallen soldiers. The trees took a dose that would kill a man instantly. They did not even get a commemorative plaque. Then there is the vehicle graveyard at Rosoka, a truly stunning monument to futility. Miles and miles of our technology sitting in neat rows, rusting into the poisoned earth. Fire trucks, helicopters that flew over the core, armored personnel carriers, all the machines we sent to fight the atom, all defeated. They sit there now, silent and intensely radioactive, a mechanical army waiting for orders that will never come. Our great war machines, killed by an enemy they could not see and now too dangerous to even touch. And at the heart of it all, the beast itself, Reactor number 4, entombed in its concrete sarcophagus. They called it the shelter object, a bland bureaucratic name for the world's most terrifying tombstone. They poured hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete and steel to lock the monster in its cage. A heroic effort, but the cage is already cracking. The monster is still breathing. So now they have built another bigger cage to put over the first one. Our solutions are like nesting dolls of failure. But the most surreal part of the zone, the punchline to the cosmic joke, is that in our absence, life has returned. With humanity gone, the animals have thrived.
Wolves, bears, lynx, and wild horses now roam the empty streets of Pripyat. The forests are dense and overgrown. It turns out that a daily dose of strontium-99 is less dangerous to wildlife than a daily dose of humanity. We created the world's most successful and most toxic nature preserve. We had to poison a piece of the earth so thoroughly that it finally became safe from us. And the scientists come now from all over the world to study this strange, mutated Eden. They count the wolves. They measure the radiation in the mushrooms. They marvel at nature's resilience. They are studying the beautiful garden that grew on top of our grave. Not everyone left. A few hundred, mostly old women, refused the evacuation. The Samosli, the self-settlers, they trickled back to their ancestral villages inside the zone, preferring to die on their own contaminated soil than in a soulless concrete apartment in Kyiv. They live without electricity, without doctors. They drink the water. They eat the vegetables from their gardens. They are tougher than any of us. These babushkas, with their headscarves and their wrinkled smiles, are the true masters of the zone. They have stared down the Soviet state, and they have stared down the invisible atom. They are living symbols of a truth we often forget. The love for one's home is a force of nature more powerful than a nuclear meltdown. I salute them. They are crazier and braver than any firefighter. If you're still processing this monumental disaster, be sure to subscribe. We have only scratched the surface of this folly. The story of the zone is still being written every day in the mutations of its plants and the half-life of its soil. So the zone is not empty. It is full of ghosts, full of animals, full of memories, and full of a quiet, relentless life that simply does not care about our mistakes. It is a world without us, and that, perhaps, is the most profound judgment on what we did. The world is better off without us. This place, this monument to our failure, has become a tourist destination. Can you believe the absurdity? People pay money to take a guided tour of our tragedy. They pose for photographs in front of the rusting Ferris wheel. They carry Geiger counters and gasp when it clicks faster. Our hell has become their holiday. Our pain is their entertainment. I suppose, in a way, it is the ultimate victory of capital over communism. They walk through my empty apartment. They look at the peeling wallpaper, the child's doll left on the floor. They feel a little shiver of excitement, of danger. Then they get back on their air-conditioned bus and go home with a story to tell to their friends. They visit the zone, but they do not understand it. They cannot. To understand the zone, you have to have lost something there. A home, a future, a child, a life. It is not a backdrop for a photograph. It is a graveyard, and the ghosts do not like the flash of the camera. We prefer the quiet. The zone is a warning, a permanent, festering warning carved into the map. It is a message from the past to the future, a message that says, be careful, be humble, do not trust your machines or your governments or your own pride. Because this is the price of failure, a scar on the earth that will outlast your species. I am a part of that scar now, a ghost of the zone. My voice, this broadcast, is just another form of its radiation, another form of its haunting, an echo from a place where time has stopped, an echo of a promise we made to ourselves about a bright future, and the spectacular way in which we broke it. So what now? The story is told. The tour is over. We are standing at the edge of the zone of alienation, looking in. You are safe on the other side of your screen. But the lesson of this place should follow you home. It should whisper to you when you hear people speak of progress without cost, of power without responsibility. This is my final request. Do not let this place become just a tourist trap or a footnote in a history book. It must remain a lesson, a harsh, radioactive lesson, and it is your job to remember it. So subscribe to this channel. Keep these stories alive. Build your own monument, not of concrete, but of memory. Ensure that the zone of alienation remains a singular, terrible achievement, and not a blueprint for the future. Remember us. Remember what happens when we forget.
The clicking is getting louder now. It's the only music I have left. A frantic rhythmic beat played on an instrument of cesium and strontium. It is the sound of time passing here in the zone, the sound of the earth itself slowly dying. My voice is getting weaker, a ghost in the static. I think my half-life is just about up. So this is it, the final broadcast. One last story from the man on the roof before the signal fades completely. I have shown you everything. The naivete of a perfect Soviet city on the eve of its own destruction. The beautiful, terrible blue light of a fire that should have been impossible. The arrogance of the man who built the temple to the atom with a fatal secret flaw in its heart. I have walked you through the wards of Hospital Number 6, where my friends and I fell apart piece by piece, a slow-motion horror show conducted by an invisible executioner. You have seen the faces of the liquidators, the biorobots, sent to fight a nuclear holocaust with a shovel and a 90-second lifespan. You have heard the silence of my abandoned city, Pripyat, a ghost town where laundry still hangs on the line, waiting for mothers who will never return. We have sat together through the farce of a trial, where scapegoats were punished to protect a guilty system. I have tried to make you understand the anatomy of a lie, how it spreads faster than any radioactive cloud, and how it poisons everything it touches. I have held nothing back. I have given you the full tour of our grand mistake. My only regret is that you can't smell it. And why? Why this long transmission from the edge of oblivion? Because a man's death should mean something. My death, and the deaths of thousands, was recorded as an inconvenience, an accounting error, a state secret. They tried to bury us in zinc coffins and bury our story in classified files. I simply could not allow that. This broadcast is my refusal to be erased, my last act of defiance, a ghost shouting into the void, hoping someone is listening. It is funny in a way. The state I served, the mighty Soviet Union, is gone now. It collapsed under the weight of its own lies, and Chernobyl was the biggest lie of all. It was a tumor that the state could not hide, a sickness that exposed the rottenness within. The system died, and I am one of its final, fading symptoms, a radioactive ghost haunting the ruins of a dead empire. I think of my wife, Lyudmila. I hope she found some peace. I hope she remembers me before the fire, before my skin turned black and my voice was a whisper. I think of my comrades. I hope they found a place where the air is clean and the vodka is cold. They were good men. They deserved a better death and a better story than the one they were given. The story is yours now. The truth is a heavy thing, I know. It burns. But it is better to be burned by the truth than to live comfortably in a lie. The world is full of new reactors, new promises of a perfect future, new men in suits who say,
everything is under control. Do not believe them. Question everything. Demand the truth. Let our ghosts be the nagging voice of doubt in the back of your mind. And so, as the sun rises on a world that still pretends nothing is wrong, this has been Anatoly, your humble and rapidly fading broadcaster from the burning heart of Chernobyl. We felt the heat, saw the glow, and bore witness to the unforgivable sin of a state that lied to its own people. If this desperate, darkly humorous transmission from the very brink of oblivion has given you a moment of profound contemplation, or perhaps made you appreciate your own era's free press, then my purpose is served. Keep listening, keep questioning, and for the sake of all who came after us, keep that subscribe button pressed. Because even when the truth is invisible and the lies are official, some sacrifices and some stories still manage to echo through the ruins. Until the next broadcast, from a different, perhaps safer realm. Farewell, comrades.